y'all. Thank y'all for being here. I want to, y'all stand up here. Yes, that's fine. It's fine. I want to introduce a few folks that are up here with me before we get going. If somebody wants to stand over here, they can. Y'all come up on in here. So I have Judge Settle from Van Buren, Crawford County, circuit judge here with us. She oversees a mental health court, specialty court there. Marty Sullivan, who's the Director, Administrative Office of the Courts, and Kristen Clark, Deputy Director. I get that title right? Correct. Thank y'all for being here. Let me do like I often do. I want to give a little background with a little bit of a narrative, a little bit of a story of sort of how we got here. So I have long been an observer as lieutenant governor, and even way back when I was in Congress, but an observer and supporter of some of the specialty court programs here in the state. And specifically, that's drug courts, veterans courts, mental health courts, even includes juvenile courts in that context. So you can have a juvenile drug court, for example. And I have participated in some of the graduations and supported them from afar. I really didn't have any direct control or authority as lieutenant governor. But when I was about to take over in this position, this was something that I thought very strongly about, and I wanted to help any way that I could. Now, these are diversion type programs. They take individuals who have been charged with particular offenses, who also have mental health issues, addiction issues, and maybe even are a veteran. And certain individuals can be approved, to be diverted through these specialty courts programs instead of the traditional criminal justice system. Why do we do this? Well, the goal is to get these people treatment because it is seen that their challenges, mental health challenges, addiction, whatever, that's the core of their problem. And if we can deal with that, we are more likely to get them back on track and thriving in society. That fair judgment? Yes. So when I took office, I knew that there had been a lot of discussions about funding specialty courts programs, and that a lot of these programs are operating on a shoestring. I had heard stories of some where the judge helps pay for some. Bless you. The judge helps pay for some of it. People pass the hat, so to speak. So just some real challenges with funding. And so I sent a letter out right after taking office to all of these specialty court judges. And I basically said, hey, we've got opioid funds that can only be used for opioid-related matters. And that's very restrictive, but there's a role for those funds. And I said, hey, I have these available. I'd like to know what your needs are. Well, I basically kicked down a door or opened the floodgates, whatever your analogy. We got a lot of interest in money for specialty courts. And what was apparent to me immediately is that the amount of the need for funds, the thirst for these funds, could not be met by the funds that I have here, these opioid funds. And now a lot of the needs can't be met because they're not specific to opioids. But even so, setting those aside, still could not meet the demand And so I said, okay, we need to figure out a path forward where we can't fund them all these needs, but we can help in some way. So I convened, requested, invited judges to come over, these specialty court judges, to come over and have lunch and just discuss what their needs are, how their programs are working, what their challenges are. And what I heard from a lot of urban courts as well as rural and everything in between. And the commonality started to become clear to me. I did not go into that meeting with a plan, but as the meeting progressed, it became clear to me that there were some expenses that all of the courts have to pay for, and that I could create a model, a rubric, a structure to fund very specific items for anyone who requests them. And so we started talking about what those categories might be. And at the same time, I had gotten a lot of requests, as I still do, from around the state for those who want to help. Many have a great track record. Many of them are nonprofits, and they're trying to build brick and mortar treatment facilities. They're trying to fund their nonprofit program that helps with addiction, etc. And I said, well, wait a minute. Why don't we identify and isolate several categories of expenses that we know will directly impact those who are in need of help, and at the same time, instead of funding indirectly a nonprofit that might build some beds for their facility or whatever that may or may not be filled soon, if we fund the categories which include funding the individual's stay at a facility, that benefits some of those same nonprofits that are trying to help, that need that revenue stream for their model to work. And so what we did is we identified, working with judges and the administrative office of the courts, Marty, Kristen, and Mike Carl on my staff, we identified these different areas. And so here are let me see, I think I've got a button here that I can. Well, am I doing something wrong? Can you get that to, he'll get that to the next one. So, there we go. So, yeah, so in the letter, which we can get everybody, we've got copies of this letter for everybody? Yeah? Right, Cecil? Okay. So these 4 categories are areas that we agreed all of these specialty courts need funded. Transitional recovery housing, okay, that's putting an individual up in a housing facility. So that's going to be money that follows the individual who needs help. And it's also going to inure to the benefit of the facility, because they're filling that bed, right? Because they can't exist with no one paying for the treatment, okay, or the housing. So then you have under that mental health, substance treatment, and recovery, which is the core of treating those with these addiction, mental health problems. And then peer recovery support services, community mentors. These are individuals who go alongside those with the challenges. They play a critical role in encouraging, shaping, teaching, supporting, and then transportation assistance. One of the things that stood out is that a lot of times individuals who need treatment have to travel, and they don't have the ability to pay for gas every day to drive an hour each way, or maybe they don't drive themselves, but there is a service that can drive them, but they don't have the funds for that, and the specialty courts didn't necessarily have them. So basically, what I said is, look, I don't know how much this is going to cost. I don't know. We haven't done this, so we don't really know what the demand is going to be. So I'll set $1 million aside of opioid abatement funds, which I have done, and we will take requests through Marty and Kristen at the Administrative Office of the Courts. So that's who the judges normally deal with. So they'll request funding for one of these areas for individuals. This follows the individual. This is at the granular level. So they'll make that request, and they'll converse with Carl on my staff, and we'll work to see whether that's something we can cut a check for. And we're going to see what the demand looks like. We're going to keep good data, so we'll have some metrics, and we can see where this money's going and where the core need is. Now, this will not satisfy all of the other financial requests or needs that a lot of these courts have, operating expenses for personnel, etc. This is very focused. These four categories all directly relate to getting assistance to those in need, whether it be in a mental health court, in Judge Settle's case, whether it be a drug court, veterans court, one of these juvenile drug courts, for example. We will take those requests. And if we find, for example, which I doubt is the case, but if we find that one of these categories no one ever requests money for, well, then we may look to add something else, right? This can be iterative and evolving so that we're meeting the needs of the courts and ultimately the needs of those who are struggling with this addiction. So this is not a cure-all, but what it does do is it puts money where it matters immediately, like today. And so if someone this afternoon, I don't know if you're getting back in time, but if someone this afternoon, if it was determined that someone in your court, Judge, needed assistance, then we could okay that today and get them going to a facility, pay for the transportation if needed, etc. Now, you may be asking, well, what would happen without this? Well, I'll tell you what's happening. In some cases, individuals aren't getting the money they need for this treatment. Or they're only getting it for a month and they need it for 2 months. Or some of the judges and others are using their own money to pool together to fund help for some of these people. So this is not going to cure everything, but it is a pilot program that I think is a good use. I know it is a good and direct use of the opioid abatement money, and I'm just excited about it. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Judge Settle and let the judge just talk about what it means to her. And I'm sure you've all got the release. Let's make sure there's a quote from the judge in there and from Marty. But Judge, why don't you share your thoughts, and then we'll let Marty speak.
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Attorney General Griffin, for this opportunity for specialty courts. I truly see on a daily basis as a circuit judge that has a specialty court docket, specifically a mental health court, the immediate needs for folks coming into our program, particularly for treatment. Either they don't have insurance or there's not a state bed available, and there's just not a way to get somebody treatment that desperately needs it, because what we're trying to do is stabilize folks in these initial phases of our court system so that they can go on to become productive citizens in our communities and not a drain on our communities and our resources. And so just being able to have somewhere to go and ask, because we don't have regular funding to our courts, at least not, most of the courts. And so, just to be able to have a resource to call and say, hey, we need a bed for this person. We don't have insurance for them. They don't have a state bed available. Or transitional housing. People get out of, rehab and immediately, we try to get them into transitional housing so they're not immediately put back in a situation. People, places, and things is one of the things we talk about in specialty courts. Is not putting them in a position where they're around people, places, and things that get them back in the position that they were. So transitional housing is often one of the most effective tools that we have in long term in getting people back on their feet. And so, but they have to, start paying for transitional housing. So coming directly out of rehab with their criminal background and having the funds to immediately start paying for that. Just look, even a week can help someone go out and get a job so that they can be making those payments, because that's our goal. We want people to get to a place where, like I said, they're productive citizens. So these are truly immediate needs that we have with folks coming into our programs. And transportation, there's just so many folks that the basic needs that some of us may take for granted don't have. And transportation is one of the most important needs after rehabilitation treatment. That is going to be so important for our program and for programs across the state and Arkansans across the state dealing with opioid addiction. It is truly going to make a difference, and I thank you again.
Thank you.
We'll
I want
really
to ask the judge, what percentage of the drug addiction problem, when you're looking at the individuals, what percentage of the individuals are struggling or have struggled with opioids specifically? What I've been told is that regardless of what the drug addiction is, almost all of the individuals have had some interaction, some experience abusing opioids, whether it's the core, whether it was their primary drug or not. Do you have any thoughts or experience on that?
I actually looked at these numbers for my court specifically, and we have one person that's been through our program that didn't need treatment of some kind, that didn't have some type of addiction background, and 88% had an opioid addiction background in a mental health court. These are co-occurring disorders, and so when you think of opioid addiction, you may think of just drug courts, but that's not true, because our veterans courts, our mental health courts, we are all seeing the same things. There's just other issues that are coming into play with that. So
very helpful. Yeah.
Very large percentage.
So most overwhelming number
Yes.
in terms of opioids. Thank you, Judge.
Yes.
Marty, you want?
Yeah, again, I just want to echo thanks to the General for these funds. As someone that has gone into the specialty courts, there's over 100 specialty courts in the state of Arkansas. So we're talking about fellow Arkansans that need help. And so when you sit in the graduation ceremonies or you go to the specialty courts and you hear everyday Arkansans struggling, I mean, everyone in this room has been affected by addiction. And getting people direct support is what's going to help them through this process. They have literally passed a hat around, I've seen this, to help cover a month worth of transitional housing for fellow classmates. And when I saw that, I was heartbroken by that. I mean, these are individuals that are struggling with their own addictions, willing to put in $5 or $10 to help someone that's in their class. So last night, I was in Heber Springs. All of the juvenile court judges are having a conference up there yesterday and today. And I mentioned this at dinner last night to one of our juvenile judges, and he said, I have someone that's a teenager that's in our juvenile drug court that's battling addiction. We've got a spot for him in Little Rock, but he doesn't have a driver's license. And he can't get from Pine Bluff to Little Rock. And he's falling through the cracks. If we don't get him that help.
Are we going to be able to fund that one?
I'm calling him. As soon as I get out of here, I'm calling the judge and say, we've got this. And so that'll be hopefully one of the first kids that we can help. But again, I appreciate the general for allowing these funds to trickle down with really no red tape. This is going to be an email that goes out to all of the judges this afternoon or this morning, and we're going to let them know if they've got individuals that need treatment, that need transitional housing, because the judge hit the nail on the head. You get people that either are coming out of jail or they come out of a treatment facility. If they go right back into that negative environment, they're going to start using again. So you really need that transitional housing to help make sure that they are successful and help them find a job. And, this is really, really critical. Transportation is key. Recovery is key. I mean, this is going to help hundreds of Arkansans. So I think I'm also equally excited about the opportunity for us to collect the data on where this is going to be utilized. And in here, too, we've got some veteran treatment courts. And what we've seen is there's a lot of federal money that supports veterans, but a lot of that is centralized in larger urban populations. So, for example, if there's a veteran in Stone County, they may not have transportation to a facility to receive treatment. So I think we track these funds, we could potentially go after more federal dollars in the VA to help veterans throughout the state. So this really is a huge investment. It's going to be a cool pilot program for us to produce the data on to see how many Arkansans it's helping, where exactly it's going, and I'm excited that this is really phase one of a multi-phase solution.
Thank you, Marty.
You bet.
Yeah, and so we'll see where this goes. A lot of good policy ideas can spring from this data and what we're going to be seeing or not seeing. And it's also, you can talk about what your needs are, but we're going to have a record. We're going to have a record of whether a specialty court requested a particular sort of funding or not, how much they requested it. Maybe they thought a particular expense was going to be primary in their mind, and the numbers show that it was another expense that was actually more significant. And the data will show that. And so that's going to be extremely helpful. So we'll and I want to say to your point about bureaucracy, there's not going to be any here. We're not hiring any more people for this. They're not either. The judges will just send an email or have a letter, phone call to Kristen, and she'll communicate with my office, and we'll figure out whether it fits into these 4 categories. And, it's flexible. Over time, we can expand or contract those categories, and so we're real excited about it. Any questions?
Yeah, you said the opioid settlement money can only be used for specific opioid-related purposes. So can this money only be used for those who have like an opioid addiction?
Yeah, good question. So we have to abide by the settlements that are the guide for settlement funds. And the opioid settlement, those are called resulted in restricted funds. We have some unrestricted funds that we get through settlements, but the opioid settlements all produced restricted funds, which means they have to be used consistent with the appendix to the settlement. In a nutshell, without you having to read the stack of what opioid abatement is, there's a really large definition, and it just has to relate to dealing with the opioid problem, reducing the opioid problem, and sort of at a very high level. That's a way to describe it. Now, you just heard the numbers. 88% of those with addiction in her court alone have indicated that they have some experience with opioid addiction. So that's not everybody, but that's almost everybody. And I think from what I've heard, that's reflective of the extremely high percentage of opioid addiction in the state, of the pool of people with addiction. So if someone, for example, only had alcohol addiction, not opioid, I mean, that's bad enough. But if they had alcohol addiction, they had never touched another drug, then in that instance, we would obviously have to treat that differently. But that's extraordinarily rare. And by and large, opioids and fentanyl is so pervasive that most of the overwhelming number of individuals who are going through these courts have had some sort of interaction using opioids at some point. So that is an important point, but I don't think that is a significant point. Anything else? Yep.
Any update on ongoing opioid litigation?
Well, we just settled. Nothing I can share with you except we just settled with Kroger about 3 weeks ago. The core of the opioid litigation is done. We still have a few things here and there to tie up, but we settled with Kroger about a few weeks ago, and I think that was $13 million, something like that. Is that right? Yeah, approximately $13 million. That will be paid. They don't just cut a check for $13 million. It's over a significant amount of time. Will be coming into this office long after I'm no longer here. So.
Ask the judge, out of those four things, what do you expect spending the most on?
Yeah, these.
Rehabilitation, the transitional living, and transportation. Those three. I know that's three of the four, but we need all of those and use them routinely. On almost everybody that comes in, we have problems with transportation and making sure that they're receiving treatment, because a lot of our folks come out of jail. They go over to our CSU, which is a 3 to 5 day location where they can get kind of a little bit stable from jail, find out what their medication needs are, and then go into treatment, and then from treatment to transitional housing. So it just depends on whether the person has insurance, whether there's state beds available, whether they can immediately get a job after getting out of rehabilitation, so that they can pay for the transitional housing. So those three of the four are the biggest that I'm going to see making a difference in my court, and it is every person need, just about.
Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate you.